Good morning! Welcome back to Prairie Stories. Today we continue our readings from The Animal Family by Randall Jarrell. Chapter 5, The Lynx. One day in early spring, the mermaid came back from the sea. She had spent 3 days with her own people. The hunter must have been watching for her. He met her in the meadow. When they got to the door of the house, he said to her, trying to keep from smiling, "I've got a surprise for you." "The bear's back." "Nope, he's still in the cave, but you're warm. When you get inside, tell me if you see anything different." The mermaid went in and looked eagerly, then carefully around. There were flames in the fireplace, and shells in the hunting horn over the fireplace. The bearskin was on the bed, the deerskins and sealskins were on the floor, the bows and arrows were on the wall. "It must be a small surprise," the mermaid said. "A big one for his age," the hunter answered matter-of-factly. "Look in the bottom drawer." The bottom drawer of the chest by the bed was open, so that you could see inside it the silver and white deerskin confusion of the hunter's shirts. "I'll straighten your shirts," the mermaid said automatically. With the years, she had become a spasmodic, enthusiastic housekeeper who straightened the room at the same speed at which she caught salmon. "Oh, do," said the hunter, laughing disproportionately. But when the mermaid reached down to the drawer hissed at her. She sprang back. There in the middle of the drawer, white, silver, and gray as the shirts, was a spotted kitten as big as a cat. His tremendous silver eyes met the mermaid's, and, shrinking into the corner, he gave a hiss that would have done credit to a sea serpent. "Another boy," said the hunter equably. "I got lonesome without you or the bear." "No, what's it really?" "A lynx. A baby lynx." "How on earth did you get it?" "I stole him. The mother has 4 more, and she'll never miss him. I don't think she can count up to 5 anyway." "But how did you get it without her knowing?" "She lives in a cave up in the hills. I saw her feeding them outside it. I was downwind from them, and none of them smelled me. You should have seen them playing with what she'd fed them. It was the way the bear used to be when he was little, only more so, a lot more so. After that, I'd go by every once in a while, believe me, I was careful, and I'd see them playing on the rocks outside the cave. Their mother wanted them to stay inside, I guess, but they didn't want to. This one's the bravest of the bunch. When I went by the day you left, he was 40 feet from the mouth of the cave. I thought, somebody's going to snap you up. And I was right. Somebody did." "But how long will it take to tame him?" "He's tame now, where I'm concerned. He just doesn't know you yet." "Watch." The mermaid went over to her chair, sat down, and watched. The hunter held out his hand to the kitten in a way that was neither fast nor slow, careless nor careful, but that seemed to take it for granted that the little lynx wanted the hunter to touch him. And the lynx didn't hiss, didn't shrink back, but let the hunter scratch him under the chin. In a moment he was purring. "Why does he make that grating noise?" the mermaid asked. She had never heard a cat purr. For that matter, she had never seen a cat except once, and it had been a bobcat 50 yards off in the forest. "That's purring," the hunter said. "Cats do it when they feel good. And look, he's kneading his paws." The lynx's purr had got louder and louder, and he was working his claws in and out of the shirts with a look of absent, ecstatic satisfaction on his face. "Why do you call it kneading his paws?" "I don't know. That's what my mother called it. The cat on the boat did it. I don't know what it means." "Kneading his paws," repeated the mermaid, and put the phrase by purring. For the first time in many months, she had some new words. "He's very playful," said the hunter proudly. "He plays as much in a day as the bear played in a week. You ought to see him with a ball." He went over, got the ball, and rolled it past the drawer. The lynx was on it in one bound. He gave the ball 2 immense instantaneous bites, batted it from one paw to the other, flung it into the air, and then began to chase it around the room. He was doing it all himself, but you could never have told that from looking at him, or from looking at the ball. The ball came to life, and the lynx was after it. When the ball stopped, he would hide behind some inch-high fold in a deerskin, and then, with agonizing slowness, as carefully as a man walking a wire over an abyss, would work his invisible way up to the ball. "He makes a sort of story out of it," said the mermaid, enchanted. The lynx sprang. He's too clever for it. Poor Bollet hasn't a chance. Look how big his paws are, the hunter said, and they'll always look that big, even when he's grown up. That's how they can walk on snow so well. And see how long his hind legs are. Why, they're ever so much longer than his front legs, the mermaid said surprisedly. Is that why he can jump so high? The hunter had just tossed the ball to the lynx in a slow, careful arc, and the lynx had met it in midair. Oh, he can jump higher than that. He can jump to the top of the chest already. I'll bet you that in a month he'll be jumping all the way up to the rafters. The hunter would have lost his bet, but only by a week. After that, the rafters were a kind of special treetop kingdom, all the lynx's own. Usually he jumped from the floor to the top of the chest, and then jumped to the rafters. But if he had to, he could tense himself all over, make a couple of false starts, then shoot up to a rafter in one soaring, unbelievable bound. It was dark up there. The lynx went comfortably from rafter to rafter, and then lay with his big, serious head. After the first month or two, he stopped looking like a kitten, stretched flat on his outstretched paws, watched, thought, dozed. The bigger he got, the stranger it was to see him in the rafters. Set there in the air above their heads like a cloud by moonlight, staring at them with his big, steady silver eyes, he looked magical. A spell the forest had cast on the house. From the first, the lynx loved being with the bear. He had started out with one big furry thing, his mother. When he stretched himself against that great brown mound, so awkward and oblivious, the lynx looked very quick and smooth and small. Away from the bear, he looked quick and smooth and big. How deftly he sat at the table, delicately eating and drinking from his dish and bowl, purringly taking a bit of fish from the mermaid's fingers. They had given him the bear's chair. The bear had long ago outgrown it, and sat on the floor by the table now, his head and shoulders towering above it. The lynx had the best table manners of them all, except when they served him partridge. He loved it so much that he would dab at his piece with his paw, work it out of his dish onto the table, and then, with a rapt stare, rub his head against it. Once he got so excited that he flung it into the air, batted it to the floor, and then chased it around the room as if it were his ball. The bears growing up had been one long accident. The lynx grew up as smoothly and designedly as he did everything else. The first time he got on the roof even, he managed to get down by himself, after the mermaid and the hunter had told him and told him and told him he could. But one day, the hunter left the top drawer of the chest open, the one that held his mother's handkerchief. When they came back, the rumpled deerskins were in piles on the floor, and the lynx, still looking slightly out of breath, was lying in the corner with the wet, shredded handkerchief a few inches from his nose. "Oh, what a shame," said the mermaid. "It's not his fault," the hunter said sadly. "He doesn't know any better." He reached down and patted the lynx, and the lynx purred. But after they'd washed and dried the handkerchief and put it back in the drawer, it was as good as ever, in its way, and it had become a sort of lynx souvenir, too, a reminder of the only real mistake their lynx had ever made. The lynx not only hunted for himself, he hunted for the family. It was his idea, not the family's. He brought them, mostly, rabbits. At first, the hunter and the mermaid were full of encouragement. After all, it was wonderful that so young a lynx could catch so many rabbits. But the morning the mermaid woke at dawn and found 3 rabbits, slightly bloody, in a pile at the bottom of the bed, with the proud lynx asleep beside them, she said to the hunter, "We're getting to be a perfect rabbit warren. 3 already, and it's still not light out." "Tell them no," said the hunter drowsily. "He's asleep." "So am I," the hunter answered, turning over. But after a few days of their saying firmly, "It's your rabbit," and then carrying it outside, the lynx padding misunderstandingly along, he got to see that they were indifferent, hostile even, to rabbits. They were no better about squirrels, and seemed shocked almost when he brought them a fox. But the hunter was grateful for the partridge the lynx would bring. "They're good, and a lot of trouble to hunt," he said. "I hate carrying along blunt arrows. If you can bear waking up and finding them on the foot of the bed—" "Oh, I don't mind," the mermaid answered, "just as long as it's not honey." The bear had never been an ideal walking companion. It was like taking along a bed or table that kept turning over logs for grubs. But the lynx was quieter and quicker, and noticed more than you did yourself. He had a big cat's curiosity about the world. In the forest, he investigated the lower branches as easily and noiselessly as the ground. When they got to tall grass, he would cross it in a few easy, tremendous bounds, soaring up over everything like a great silver grasshopper, and he went up and down the beach as if he had been raised on one, padding along on the wet sand at the edge of the surf, sniffing at driftwood and seaweed, and occasionally rushing at some just wary enough seabird that would shoot up with a squawk. Sometimes the lynx would bound up, fresh from finding something 100 yards away, and would try hard to lead them to it, rubbing against the hunter's legs and purring, and then starting off with an enticing little rush. His notions of what the two of them would find interesting were rather lynxish notions, often ending in an "Oh, is that all?" from the mermaid or the hunter. But his notions of what would interest a bear were a bear's. The bear gobbled it up. The lynx loved to give you something, or to get you to go somewhere. He did both with a pleased, eager, bewitching look, as if it were wonderful for him, wonderful for you, wonderful, wonderful. The bear was fond of the hunter and the mermaid, but the lynx adored them. As they said, all you have to do is start to touch him and he purrs. Mostly he had a bass purr, like distant thunder, but when he felt particularly ecstatic, his purr got a queer, high, throaty sound, like a basso singing falsetto. He sat by the two of them, and rubbed against them, and followed them around, and stared at them with an absorbed, satisfied stare. In the morning when they woke up, he was so glad to see them again that he would give them little affectionate mock bites. It was almost like tickling, and would make the mermaid laugh and laugh. "Ouch," the hunter would say. "Easy, easy." It worked, too. For a moment, the lynx's teeth would barely touch him. What tickled the mermaid even more was for the lynx to finish washing himself and to start out on the two of them. He would go to work on the hunter's hair or beard and give it a long, sober, absorbed licking, till it looked all wet and shining. Meanwhile, the hunter lay back on the bed in drowsy acquiescence, and the mermaid made little speeches of admiration. "If I hadn't lived with you so long, I don't know whether I'd recognize you. He's got you so you just gleam." "In a minute, you'll be gleaming yourself," the hunter said, and before long the lynx was hard at work on the mermaid. This wasn't so quiet a job, though, since the mermaid kept laughing a string of little bubbling, glistening laughs as the tiny barbs of the lynx's tongue tickled her. Oddly, the lynx never tried to wash the bear. He must have seen that, though the bear was foolish enough to try it, washing the bear was too much, even for the bear. When all this was over, the lynx would lie beside them, one paw outstretched like a lion on a monument. It was remarkable how serious and beautiful his big face always looked. Most of the dusky spots and dark bands that had marked him a kitten had disappeared or were fainter now. In winter, he was a long-furred, full-bodied, gray and white animal. But in summer, he was thin and gray and brown, almost lanky, though his thoughtful, silver-eyed face stayed as impressive as ever. Two astonishingly long black and silver tufts of fur jutted from the tips of his gray ears. There were little vertical gray-black stripes in the center of his forehead, as though he were thinking seriously about something. And the big snowdrifts of fur that covered his cheeks and jaws and neck were striped with 3 beautiful black bars, the biggest of them running all the way up to the outer corners of his eyes. His big, clear eyes were outlined in delicate black, with 4 or 5 fine dark markings above each. Each of the bristling antenna-like hairs that sprang from his white muzzle was matched by a tiny black dot, and his little bobbed-off fawn and silver tail was jet black at the tip. In the winter, the lynx's fur was so long and fine and beautiful that you couldn't look at it without wanting to touch him. All summer, though, his fur had a sketchy, temporary feel, as though he had taken off his real coat for the hot weather and were wearing a rough substitute. After his 3rd year with them, the lynx didn't grow any larger, but as the mermaid said, he didn't need to. He was big. "Even when he plays," she went on, "he's so serious and what did you tell me the king was in the story?" The hunter thought for a moment and said, "Noble." "That's right," said the mermaid. "Noble. He really does look noble." In the morning, when they overslept, That is, when they didn't wake up as early as the lynx waked up. The lynx would wait as long as he could make himself wait, and then would bound on the bed by the hunter, stand over him seriously and very gently and carefully, his claws sheathed, try to open the hunter's eyes. So many mornings of his life, the first thing the hunter knew was a big, vague, furry something pressing against his eyelids, and when at last, struggling up from sleep, he opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was the lynx's intent eyes staring into his. Having your eyes open really is the difference between being awake and asleep. It's very clever of him, the mermaid said. Very, the hunter agreed. It's a queer way to wake up, though. The other morning I dreamed the moon was setting, and it kept getting bigger and redder and closer till I couldn't breathe, and I opened my eyes, and there was the lynx. The hunter and the lynx had a game that the hunter called boxing. The two of them sat 3 or 4 feet apart, poised, intent. Then each would try to touch the other without the other's touching him. The hunter's hands and the lynx's forepaws shot out like a snake striking, as each of them hit, dodged, blocked, hesitated. The lynx was pretty good about keeping his claws in, but occasionally he got too excited to remember, so that the hunter's shirts wore out first up and down the sleeves. "Velvet paws! Velvet paws!" the hunter would cry warningly. The mermaid had got used to his saying it, but the first time she'd asked perplexedly, "What's velvet?" "I don't know," the hunter said, "but it's what you say to a cat to get him to keep his claws in. My mother used to say it on the boat." So the hunter said it, and the mermaid and the lynx understood it, each in his own way. A little scrap of velvet there between the forest and the sea. And that is the end of Chapter 5, The Lynx. Join me next time as we read Chapter 6, The Lynx and the Bear Bring Home a Boy.